Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the spectacular stupidity of medieval mortality, where dying was an art form and common sense was apparently optional. We're talking about a 1,000-year period when humanity perfected the craft of creative self-destruction, giving us fashion that killed, medicine that murdered, and architecture that had a personal vendetta against gravity. So before we begin this journey through history's greatest hits of how not to stay alive, take a moment to like the video if you're into this kind of morbid historical comedy. And let me know in the comments what medieval death sounds the most ridiculous to you. Maybe grab a drink, you'll need it. Now settle in, dim those lights, and let's explore an age when intelligence and survival were apparently mutually exclusive. So, you think you would have survived the medieval period? That's precious. Really? Like believing you could outsmart the plague with essential oils and positive thinking. Welcome to the medieval period, where dying was easier than living, and stupidity was often terminal. This was an age when basic hygiene was considered witchcraft, when bleeding someone to death was called medicine, and when the average life expectancy was roughly equivalent to a modern college degree. 4 years, if you were lucky. 6, if you had really good parents and avoided the plague, the Mongols, and accidentally insulting someone with a sword. But here's the thing about medieval deaths. While many were tragic, noble, or at least understandable given the circumstances, some were so magnificently stupid that they deserve their own special category. These weren't deaths from battle, disease, or divine wrath. These were deaths from pure, concentrated human stupidity, the kind that makes you wonder how our species managed to survive long enough to invent the printing press, let alone Netflix. So grab your plague mask, check your humors, and prepare yourself for a journey through the most spectacularly idiotic ways people managed to shuffle off this mortal coil during humanity's most delightfully dangerous millennium. Because if there's one thing medieval people excelled at, besides dying young, it was dying in ways that would make Darwin himself weep into his beard. Let's start with fashion, because even in an era where bathing was optional and dental care was non-existent, people still found ways to literally die for their style. Medieval fashion wasn't just uncomfortable, it was actively homicidal. Take the pointed shoes, or palanes, that became wildly popular in the 14th century. These weren't just pointed shoes. These were shoes so ridiculously pointed that they required chains attached to the wearer's knees to keep the tips from dragging on the ground. The nobility competed to see who could wear the longest points, with some extending up to 2 feet beyond the actual foot. Imagine trying to walk in skis. Except the skis are made of leather and attached to your feet permanently. The church actually banned these shoes multiple times, not for their impracticality, but because they were considered tools of Satan. The church had a point. Though not about the Satan thing, these shoes were genuinely dangerous. People regularly tripped over their own feet and broke their necks falling down stairs. Others got their shoe points caught in doors, windows, or other people's clothing, leading to all manner of mishaps. Sir Reginald de Cobham, a minor English lord, met his end in 1347 when his 2-foot-long palanes got tangled in his horse's legs during a jest. The horse fell, Reginald fell, and both fell badly. The horse survived, Reginald did not. His last words, according to witnesses, were something along the lines of, "These bloody shoes," though medieval chroniclers cleaned it up considerably for their records. But shoes were just the beginning. Medieval sleeves were another fashion-based death trap. The nobility wore sleeves so long they dragged on the ground, collecting dirt, food, and occasionally small animals. These sleeves, called dagged sleeves, were often lined with fur and could weigh as much as a small child. Ladies of the court would trip over their own arms, get their sleeves caught indoors, or accidentally drag them through candles and set themselves ablaze. The most famous sleeve-related death occurred in 1396 at the French court, when the Duchess of Orleans attended a feast wearing sleeves so elaborate they required their own servant to carry them. During the evening, her sleeve, Barra tripped, pulling the Duchess backwards off her chair and onto a serving table loaded with knives. She was stabbed by 3 different carving knives before anyone could untangle her from her own clothing. The irony was not lost on contemporary chroniclers, who noted that she died, dressed to kill, and killed by dressing. Then there were the hats. Medieval hats weren't content to simply sit on heads. They had to make statements, political and otherwise. The chaperon, a hood with a long tail called a liripipe, could extend several feet from the wearer's head. These tails were often twisted, knotted, or wrapped around the head in elaborate patterns that took hours to arrange and required engineering degrees to understand. Geoffrey de Montfort, court official in 1389, wore a chaperon with a liripipe, so long he could wrap it around his waist 3 times and still have enough left over to tie his shoes. During a particularly important court ceremony, Geoffrey's liripipe got caught in a chandelier as he bowed to the king. When he tried to straighten up, the chandelier came down, crushing both Geoffrey and 2 unfortunate courtiers standing nearby. The king reportedly commented that Geoffrey had always been a bit too attached to fashion, though whether this was a joke or a genuine observation remains unclear. Women's headwear was equally lethal. The hennin, a cone-shaped headdress that could reach heights of 3 feet or more, was essentially a wearable weapon. These towering cones required special doorways in wealthy households and made any sudden movement potentially fatal. Lady Margaret of Wessex died in 1461 when her hennin got stuck in a low, hanging tapestry. As she struggled to free herself, the heavy headdress shifted, snapped her neck, and she died instantly. Witnesses said the sound was like a tree branch breaking, which was probably accurate given that some hennins were reinforced with actual wood. The fashion for tight clothing also claimed its share of victims. Men's hose, the medieval equivalent of tights, were often so tight that circulation was a genuine concern. These weren't just uncomfortable, they were medically dangerous. Sir Thomas de Warwick died in 1378 from what modern doctors would recognize as deep vein thrombosis, caused by hose so tight they essentially acted as tourniquets. He spent his final hours unable to feel his legs, convinced he was being possessed by demons, while his physician tried to cure him by bleeding him from his arms. The combination of restricted circulation and blood loss killed him within a day. Perhaps the most ridiculous fashion death involved the codpiece, that peculiar piece of male anatomy enhancement that reached its peak of absurdity in the late medieval period. Sir Baldwin de Clare wore a codpiece so large and ornate that it required its own belt system to support it. During a tournament in 1442, his codpiece got caught on his opponent's lance, instead of breaking away as it was designed to do. The entire contraption yanked Sir Baldwin from his horse and dragged him for 30 yards before the lance finally broke. He survived the dragging, but died 3 days later from what medieval physicians called shame sickness, though modern doctors would probably diagnose it as internal bleeding and shock. The pursuit of pale skin, considered a sign of nobility and wealth, led to some of the most toxic beauty regimens in human history. Women would paint their faces with lead-based cosmetics, achieving that coveted deathly pale look quite literally. The makeup contained enough lead to cause brain damage, kidney failure, and eventually death. Lady Catherine de Vere spent 2 years, slowly dying from lead poisoning, while convinced she was maintaining the height of fashion. She lost her hair, her teeth, and eventually her mind, but her skin remained fashionably white right up until her funeral. Men weren't immune to cosmetic poisoning either. The fashion for blackening teeth, popular among certain circles who believed it showed wealth theirs, because only the rich could afford enough sugar to rot their teeth, led to the use of various toxic substances. Lord Edmund de Grey used a mixture containing mercury to achieve the perfect black smile. The mercury poisoning made him increasingly paranoid and violent. He died in 1385 after challenging his own reflection to a duel. becoming so enraged when his reflection perfectly mimicked his movements that he smashed a mirror and bled to death from the resulting wounds. The medieval obsession with fur led to some genuinely bizarre fashion choices and equally bizarre deaths. The Earl of Northumberland decided in 1394 that he would wear only fur from animals he had personally killed. This led him on increasingly dangerous hunting expeditions in pursuit of exotic pelts. His final hunt was for a bear, which he planned to kill single-handedly to make a particularly impressive cloak. The bear had different ideas. The Earl was found 3 days later, mauled to death, still clutching his hunting knife and wearing a cape made from rabbit fur. Even jewelry found ways to be lethal. Heavy chains, ornate brooches, and massive rings weren't just uncomfortable, they were dangerous. Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville wore so many gold chains that he couldn't lift his arms above his head. During a fire at his manor house in 1399, he was unable to remove his jewelry quickly enough to escape. Servants found him the next morning, suffocated by smoke, still wearing over 40 pounds of gold chains that had been too heavy and too numerous to remove in time. The fashion for perfume in an age before reliable bathing led to some creative solutions and tragic outcomes. Lord Robert de Vere, apparently tired of his own smell, had his clothes soaked in a mixture of wine and herbs that was supposed to act as a primitive deodorant. The mixture was highly flammable. During a feast lit by numerous candles, Lord Robert literally went up in flames when a servant accidentally spilled wine on his treated clothing. He burned to death in his own dining hall, creating what witnesses described as a smell that was somehow both aromatic and horrifying. Perhaps the most comprehensively stupid fashion death belongs to Sir William de Montague, who died in 1356 from what can only be described as a wardrobe malfunction of epic proportions. Sir William attended a royal feast wearing new pointed shoes, a heavily padded doublet, an oversized hat with a long liripipe, and carrying a decorative sword that was too long for his height. During the evening, his hat got caught on a chandelier, his shoes tripped him, his padded doublet was too thick for him to break his fall properly, and his oversized sword got tangled in his legs. He fell down a flight of stairs, bounced off 3 steps, and landed in a heap at the bottom. The fall itself might have been survivable, but his hat had shifted during the tumble, and was now covering his face so completely that he suffocated before anyone could untangle him from his own accessories. The lesson here isn't that medieval people were particularly vain, though they certainly could be, but that fashion in an era without safety regulations, quality control, or basic understanding of physics could be genuinely lethal. Every piece of clothing was a potential weapon, every accessory a possible death trap. Medieval people didn't just dress to impress, they dressed to survive, and many of them failed at both. Medieval dining wasn't just about food, it was about making a statement, showing off wealth, and occasionally dying in the most ridiculous ways possible. This was an age when spices were worth more than gold, when sugar was a luxury item, and when the concept of food safety was about as developed as their understanding of quantum physics. The medieval feast was a performance art piece designed to demonstrate wealth power and complete disregard for human digestive limitations. Nobles would compete to see who could serve the most elaborate, expensive, and frankly dangerous meals. They served peacocks stuffed with smaller birds, which were stuffed with even smaller birds, creating what was essentially an avian Russian doll that took hours to prepare and could feed a small army. But it wasn't just the complexity that made medieval dining dangerous, it was the sheer excess. Take the case of King Henry I of England, who reportedly died in 1135 from eating a surfeit of lampreys. Now, lampreys are already pretty disgusting. They're basically sea vampires that attach themselves to fish and suck their blood. But King Henry loved them, especially when prepared with rich sauces and exotic spices. According to chroniclers, he ate so many lampreys at a single sitting that his digestive system simply gave up in protest. The exact cause of Henry's death is debated by historians. But contemporary accounts all agree that he ate himself to death on lampreys, despite his physicians warning him that his stomach couldn't handle them. His last meal reportedly consisted of dozens of the creatures, prepared in wine, honey, and imported spices. He died within hours, and his death was considered so embarrassing that official records blamed it on divine displeasure rather than royal gluttony. Medieval banquets often featured live animals as entertainment and food simultaneously. Nobles would serve elaborate pies that, when cut open, released live birds, rabbits, or even small deer into the dining hall. This seemed like a delightful surprise until you consider the logistics. Lord Edmund de Grey decided in 1389 to serve a pie containing live swans at his daughter's wedding feast. The plan was for the swans to fly gracefully around the hall, creating a magical atmosphere. Instead, the panicked swans attacked the guests, broke several windows, and caused a stampede that killed 3 people and injured dozens more. Lord Edmund himself was struck in the head by a swan's wing, knocked unconscious, and fell face first into a bowl of hot soup. He drowned in approximately 6 inches of pottage while unconscious, surrounded by chaos he had created in pursuit of culinary innovation. The wedding was postponed, and swans were banned from all future Grey family celebrations. The medieval obsession with exotic foods led to some truly bizarre culinary choices. Sir Reginald de Cobham, a different one from the shoe victim, decided in 1352 that he would only eat foods that had never been eaten before. This led him on an increasingly desperate quest for novel cuisine. He tried various weeds, insects, and eventually moved on to things that weren't technically food at all. His final meal consisted of what he believed to be an exotic type of mushroom that he'd discovered growing in his castle's dungeon. It was actually a highly toxic fungus that thrived in human waste, essentially. He poisoned himself eating toilet mushrooms. The irony that his quest for unique cuisine led him to consume something that was literally shit-based was not lost on contemporary chroniclers, though they expressed it more delicately. Medieval coup often involved elaborate mechanical devices designed to impress guests and occasionally kill the chef. The Earl of Warwick installed a mechanical spit in his kitchen that could roast an entire ox using a system of weights, pulleys, and gears. The device was operated by a small boy whose job was to run on a treadmill connected to the machinery. During a particularly important feast in 1367, the boy fell asleep on the treadmill, causing the entire mechanism to jam. The cook, Master Geoffrey, attempted to fix the device while it was still operating. He climbed into the mechanism to unjam a gear and was promptly wound into the machinery like a particularly unfortunate piece of meat. The guests upstairs waited for over an hour for their roasted ox, unaware that their cook had become part of the cooking process. He was discovered the next morning, thoroughly tenderized and completely dead, tangled in the gears of his own culinary innovation. The medieval love affair with spices led to some spectacular cases of poisoning, usually accidental, but sometimes spectacularly stupid. Lord Thomas de Berkeley received a shipment of what he believed to be exotic Eastern spices in 1378. Eager to impress his guests at an upcoming feast, he had his cooks use the entire shipment in a single meal, creating what he called the most spiced dinner in England. The spices were actually a mixture of medical compounds, including mercury, arsenic, and various other toxic substances that had been mislabeled by an incompetent merchant. Lord Thomas and 12 of his guests died within hours of the meal, their bodies racked with convulsions as the poison worked its way through their systems. The remaining guests survived only because they found the food so overseasoned that they couldn't bring themselves to finish their portions. Medieval preservation techniques led to their own share of deaths. Salt was expensive, so many people tried alternative methods of food preservation with varying degrees of success. Sir Baldwin de Clare, another different one, attempted to preserve meat by burying it in his garden, believing that the earth would keep it fresh indefinitely. After 3 months, He dug up what he assumed was perfectly preserved beef and served it at a family gathering. The meat was, predictably, completely rotten and filled with every kind of harmful bacteria medieval England had to offer. Sir Baldwin, his wife, 3 children, and 7 guests all died from what modern medicine would recognize as severe food poisoning. The symptoms, as described by contemporary physicians, included violent expulsions from both ends, convulsions, and eventual death. Sir Baldwin lasted the longest, apparently convinced until the very end that the meat had simply been aged to perfection. The medieval practice of using lead-based glazes on pottery created a slow-motion culinary disaster that claimed lives across Europe. Wealthy households used elaborate ceramic dishes glazed with lead compounds to achieve bright colors and shiny finishes. The acid in wine, fruit, and various sauces would leach the lead from the glaze, slowly poisoning anyone who ate from these dishes regularly. Lady Margaret de Montfort collected elaborate ceramic serving dishes and insisted on using them for every meal. Over the course of 5 years, she slowly died from lead poisoning, experiencing memory loss, violent mood swings, and eventually paralysis. Her physicians, not understanding the cause, tried to cure her with increasingly desperate treatments, including bleeding, purging, and eventually trepanation, drilling holes in her skull to release the evil humors. She died during the trepanation procedure, technically killed by medical treatment for a poisoning caused by her own dinnerware. Medieval banquets often featured elaborate sugar sculptures called subtleties that were works of art as much as food. These could take weeks to create and were often the centerpiece of important feasts. Master Robert, a sugar artist employed by the Duke of Lancaster, spent 3 months creating a sugar replica of the Duke's castle, complete with tiny sugar knights and sugar horses. The sculpture was so elaborate and detailed that it required its own table, and was considered too beautiful to eat. Master Robert, exhausted from months of work, and probably suffering from what we'd now recognize as diabetes from constantly tasting his creations, decided to take a nap underneath his masterpiece. During the night, the sugar castle, which weighed over 200 pounds, collapsed due to humidity changes. Master Robert was crushed to death by his own creation, buried under an avalanche of sugar knights and candy battlements. The medieval fascination with exotic animals as food led to some genuinely dangerous dining experiences. Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville decided to serve roasted peacock at a feast in 1391. But not just any peacock. He wanted to serve one that was still technically alive. His cooks developed an elaborate process where they would carefully skin the peacock, roast the meat, and then sew the skin back on with the head still attached, creating the illusion of a living bird. The process went wrong in several ways. First, the peacock wasn't quite dead when they began skinning it, leading to a violent struggle in the kitchen that left 2 cooks injured and 1 cook with a severely damaged eye from peacock talons. Second, the skin was sewn back on incorrectly, creating what witnesses described as a demon bird from hell that looked nothing like a peacock and everything like a nightmare. Sir Geoffrey insisted on carrying the dish into the dining hall himself, but the weight distribution was all wrong due to the botched reconstruction. He tripped while carrying the peacock, fell forward, and was impaled through the neck by the bird's beak, which had been reinforced with metal wire to keep its shape. He died instantly, killed by a dead peacock that had taken revenge from beyond the grave. Medieval ale and wine production was an art form practiced by people with no understanding of chemistry, sanitation, or quality control. Home brewing was common, and the results were often lethal. Brother Francis, a monk at Glastonbury Abbey, developed what he believed was a revolutionary brewing technique in 1356. His innovation involved adding various herbs and compounds to his ale to create what he called medicinal beer. The herbs included foxglove, nightshade, and various other plants that Brother Francis had chosen based on their attractive appearance, rather than their safety for human consumption. His first batch of medicinal beer contained enough natural toxins to kill a horse. Brother Francis tested it on himself first, as was his practice, and died within minutes of his first sip. His fellow monks found him the next morning, still holding his cup, with what they described as a look of profound surprise on his face. The medieval practice of using various animal parts in cooking led to some spectacularly bad decisions. Lord William de Warwick received a shipment of what he believed to be exotic sausages from the continent in 1384. Eager to try them, he had them prepared immediately for his evening meal. The sausages were actually medieval contraceptive devices made from sheep intestines and filled with various herbs and compounds. Lord William ate 3 of them before realizing something was wrong. The combination of herbs, animal parts, and preservatives used in medieval contraceptives was not designed for consumption and contained several toxic compounds. He died within hours, his body rejecting the foreign substances in increasingly violent ways. His death was recorded as being caused by exotic foods, and the actual nature of what he had consumed was diplomatically omitted from official records. Medieval cooking fires were dangerous under the best of circumstances, but some deaths were purely the result of culinary ambition exceeding common sense. Lady Catherine de Vere decided in 1393 that she wanted to roast an entire pig in her private chambers, apparently for the aroma as much as the food. She had a fire built in her bedroom and had servants bring up a spit and all the necessary equipment. The combination of an open fire, a wooden floor, tapestries hanging from the walls, and a large quantity of pig fat created what fire investigators today would recognize as a perfect firestorm waiting to happen. The pig fat began dripping into the fire, creating larger flames, which ignited the wooden floor, which spread to the tapestries. Lady Catherine was trapped in her room when the door jammed, and she burned to death along with her roasted pig. Servants reported that the smell was initially quite appetizing, before becoming horrifying. The medieval banquet tradition of serving increasingly elaborate courses led to logistical challenges that sometimes proved fatal. The Duke of Clarence decided in 1398 that his Christmas feast would feature 40 different courses, each more elaborate than the last. The kitchen staff worked for 3 days straight preparing the meal, and the serving staff had to coordinate an incredibly complex sequence of dish presentation. The 40th and final course was a massive swan stuffed with smaller birds and covered in gold leaf. The swan was so heavy that it required 4 servants to carry it, and the presentation was choreographed like a military operation. During the presentation, the lead server tripped on a rushes on the floor, causing all 4 servants to fall in a domino effect. The golden swan landed on the Duke himself, breaking his neck instantly. The irony that the Duke of Clarence was killed by his own ostentatious dinner was not lost on contemporary chroniclers, who noted that he died as he had lived excessively. The swan, incidentally, was completely destroyed in the fall, wasting weeks of preparation and enough gold leaf to fund a small military campaign. Perhaps the most comprehensively stupid culinary death of the medieval period belongs to Master Edmund, chief cook to the Earl of Northumberland, who died in 1387 from what can only be described as competitive eating taken to its logical extreme. Master Edmund had developed a rivalry with Master Geoffrey, chief cook to a neighbouring lord, over who could create the most elaborate and delicious meals. Their competition escalated until they agreed to a formal cooking contest, with the winner to be determined by who could eat the most of their opponent's food. Master Edmund prepared a meal consisting of roasted peacock stuffed with smaller birds, elaborate pies filled with exotic ingredients, and various sweet dishes containing massive amounts of honey and spices. Master Geoffrey prepared a similarly elaborate spread. The contest began at noon and continued until Master Edmund literally ate himself to death. He consumed approximately 15 pounds of food in the course of the afternoon, including an entire peacock, 3 meat pies, and various other dishes. His stomach ruptured from the sheer volume of food, causing internal bleeding and death within hours. Master Joffrey, who had shown more restraint, won the contest by default, but was reportedly so disturbed by his rival's death that he gave up competitive cooking entirely. The medieval kitchen was a place where culinary ambition, primitive technology, and complete ignorance of food safety combined to create perfect storms of stupidity. People didn't just die from what they ate, they died from how they prepared it, how they served it, and how they competed with it. In an age where dining was theatre, the final curtain sometimes fell on the performers as well as the audience. Medieval medicine was based on a fascinating combination of ancient Greek theories, religious beliefs, superstition, and complete ignorance of how the human body actually worked. Physicians trained for years to learn treatments that were not just ineffective, but actively lethal. The medieval medical establishment managed to turn healing into an art form of accidental murder. The cornerstone of medieval medicine was the theory of the four humus: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to this theory, illness was caused by an imbalance of these humours, and treatment involved restoring balance through various methods, most of which involved removing substances from the patient's body until they either recovered or died. Given the treatments available, death was often the more likely outcome. Bloodletting was the medieval cure, all prescribed for everything from headaches to broken bones. The theory was that most illnesses were caused by excess blood, and the solution was to remove the excess until the patient felt better. Medieval physicians had elaborate charts showing where and how much blood to remove for different conditions, and they pursued this treatment with the dedication of accountants balancing books. Sir Edmund de Grey suffered from what modern doctors would recognize as mild anemia. He was tired, pale, and had little energy. His physician, Master William, diagnosed an excess of blood and prescribed immediate bloodletting. Over the course of 2 weeks, Master William removed approximately half of Sir Edmund's blood supply through various methods, including leeches, cupping, and direct bleeding from opened veins. Sir Edmund grew progressively weaker, which Master William interpreted as evidence that more blood needed to be removed. The treatment continued until Sir Edmund literally had no blood left to remove. He died from what the physician recorded as stubborn humours that refused to be balanced, but what any modern observer would recognize as death by medical vampirism. The most elaborate bloodletting death occurred in 1389 when Lord Thomas de Berkeley developed a mild fever. His physician, convinced that the fever indicated a massive excess of blood, decided to remove it all at once using a new technique he had developed. Master Joffrey attached multiple leeches to Lord Thomas, while simultaneously cutting several veins and applying cupping glasses to draw out blood from multiple locations. The procedure was designed to remove blood faster than traditional methods, and it worked exactly as intended. Lord Thomas bowed out in under an hour. His body drained of blood so efficiently that witnesses compared it to slaughtering a pig. Master Joffrey proudly recorded the technique in his medical notes as rapid humour balancing, apparently unaware that he had invented an elaborate method of murder. Medieval surgery was performed without anesthesia, antiseptics, or any real understanding of anatomy. Surgeons learned their craft by practicing on whoever was available, and the mortality rate was approximately 100% for any procedure more complex than removing splinters. What made medieval surgery particularly dangerous wasn't just the lack of medical knowledge, it was the medieval surgeon's complete confidence in techniques that were fundamentally lethal. Master Robert, a renowned surgeon in London, developed what he believed was an innovative technique for removing kidney stones. His method involved making an incision in the patient's back, reaching in with his bare hands, and feeling around until he found something that seemed like it might be a stone. He would then pull it out, sew up the incision, and wait to see if the patient lived or died. Master Robert performed this procedure on over 30 patients during his career. Not one survived. The problem wasn't just that he was operating in unsanitary conditions without anesthesia. It was that he had no idea where kidneys actually were located. His incisions were often made in the wrong part of the back entirely, and he frequently removed pieces of spine, ribs, or internal organs while searching for kidney stones. His most famous failure occurred in 1376, when Sir Baldwin de Clare sought treatment for what he described as stone pain in his back. Master Robert performed his kidney stone removal procedure and proudly extracted what he claimed was the largest stone ever seen. The stone was actually Sir Baldwin's spine, which Master Robert had mistaken for a particularly large kidney stone. Sir Baldwin died immediately, but Master Robert recorded the operation as a success, noting in his surgical journal that the massive stone was successfully removed, though the patient succumbed to unrelated causes. Medieval physicians had an impressive arsenal of treatments that were guaranteed to kill patients faster than whatever ailments they were trying to cure. Mercury was prescribed for various conditions, including syphilis, skin problems, and general weakness. The theory was that mercury's liquid properties would help balance the patient's humors, but the reality was that mercury poisoning was almost always fatal. Lady Margaret de Montfort developed a skin rash that modern dermatologists would recognize as eczema, uncomfortable, but not dangerous. Her physician prescribed a mercury treatment that involved rubbing liquid mercury directly onto her skin twice daily for several months. The mercury was absorbed through her skin and accumulated in her organs, causing brain damage, kidney failure, and eventual death. The treatment was considered successful because Lady Margaret's skin rash did eventually clear up, mainly because she died before it could continue bothering her. Her physician recorded the case as an example of mercury's effectiveness, noting that the patient's skin was completely clear at the time of death, which he attributed to the excellence of his treatment, rather than the fact that death tends to resolve most cosmetic concerns. Medieval dentistry deserves special mention as a field that managed to turn minor tooth problems into life-threatening emergencies. Medieval dentists had two primary treatments: pulling teeth out with pliers, or drilling holes in teeth with primitive tools. Both procedures were performed without anesthesia and often resulted in massive infections that killed the patient. Master Geoffrey, a traveling tooth puller, developed what he considered an innovative approach to dental care. Instead of pulling teeth one at a time, he would remove all of a patient's teeth at once, believing this would prevent future dental problems. His technique involved using large pliers to grip multiple teeth simultaneously and yanking them out in groups. The procedure was exactly as horrific as it sounds. Patients would often die from shock, blood loss, or the infections that inevitably followed. Master Geoffrey performed this complete dental solution on dozens of patients across England during his career. His clients all died within days of the procedure, but Master Geoffrey maintained that this was due to pre-existing humor imbalances rather than his technique. His most memorable failure occurred when Sir Reginald de Warwick sought treatment for a single loose tooth. Master Geoffrey convinced him that all his teeth needed to be removed to prevent future problems. The procedure took over an hour, during which Sir Reginald lost consciousness several times from pain and blood loss. He died 3 days later from what his family recorded as tooth sickness, though modern doctors would recognize it as death from massive infection and blood loss. Medieval pharmacology was based on the principle that the more exotic and expensive an ingredient was, the more powerful its healing properties must be. This led to medicines that contained everything from ground pearls to unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk to human body parts. Medieval pharmacists competed to create the most elaborate and expensive remedies, apparently believing that complexity was directly related to effectiveness. The most expensive medicine of the medieval period was called mithridate, a compound that supposedly contained over 60 different ingredients, including viper's flesh, opium, and various rare spices. The theory was that this mixture would cure any poison or illness, making the patient essentially immortal. The reality was that mithridate contained enough toxic substances to kill a healthy person and enough opium to render them unconscious. While dying, Lord Edmund de Cobham purchased a supply of mithridate in 1392 for the equivalent of a knight's annual income. The medicine came with instructions to take a small amount daily as a preventive measure against all illnesses. Lord Edmund, eager to maximize his investment, decided to take larger doses to achieve better results. Within a week, he was hallucinating, convulsing, and eventually died from what medieval physicians called medicine poisoning, one of the few accurate diagnoses of the period. Medieval physicians also believed that like cured like, leading to treatments that involved giving patients more of whatever was making them sick. If someone had a fever, they were given hot drinks and wrapped in heavy blankets to increase their temperature until the fever burned itself out. If someone had diarrhea, they were given laxatives to clear out the evil humours causing the problem. Sir Thomas de Berkeley developed what modern doctors would recognize as mild food poisoning after eating questionable meat. His symptoms included stomach pain and mild diarrhea, unpleasant but not life-threatening. His physician, Master Robert, diagnosed an excess of corrupt humours in the digestive system and prescribed a treatment designed to clear out all the corruption. The treatment involved massive doses of laxatives, purgatives, and emetics designed to empty Sir Thomas's digestive system completely. Over the course of 3 days, Master Robert administered enough laxatives to clear out a stable full of horses. Sir Thomas died from severe dehydration and electrolyte imbalance, his body completely drained of fluids by medicines designed to cure him. Medieval surgery sometimes ventured into territories that can only be described as experimental butchery. Surgeons would attempt procedures that were theoretically possible, but practically impossible given their tools and knowledge. The most ambitious surgical death occurred in 1381, when Master William, a surgeon in Paris, attempted to perform what he called complete body purification. The procedure involved opening the patient's chest and abdomen, removing all the internal organs, washing them in wine, and putting them back. Master William believed this would cure any internal illness by literally cleaning the inside of the patient's body. The theory was that organs could be temporarily removed, cleaned, and reinstalled like pieces of equipment. Master William attempted this procedure on Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville, who was suffering from what was probably indigestion. The surgery lasted 6 hours, during which Master William removed Sir Geoffrey's liver, stomach, intestines, and several other organs, washed them in expensive wine, and attempted to put them back where he thought they belonged. Sir Geoffrey died during the procedure, though Master William maintained that the technique was sound and the patient's death was due to insufficient faith in the treatment. Medieval physicians were particularly fond of trepanation, drilling holes in patients' skulls to release evil spirits or corrupt humours from the brain. This procedure was prescribed for headaches, mental illness, epilepsy, and any behaviour that seemed unusual. The technique involved using primitive drills to bore holes through the skull, often while the patient was conscious, and without any form of pain relief. Master Edmund, a physician in York, became famous for his trepanation skills and claimed to have released evil spirits from over 50 patients during his career. His technique involved drilling multiple holes in the skull to ensure that all the evil spirits had escape routes. None of his patients survived the procedure, but Master Edmund attributed this to the severity of their spiritual infections rather than his surgical technique. His most elaborate trepanation occurred in 1378, when Lady Catherine de Vere sought treatment for recurring headaches. Master Edmund diagnosed severe spiritual corruption and decided that she needed multiple holes drilled in her skull to release the evil spirits. He spent 3 hours drilling holes in Lady Catherine's head, while she screamed and eventually died from blood loss and trauma. Master Edmund recorded the procedure as a complete success, noting that all evil spirits were successfully released, as evidenced by the patient's peaceful death. The medieval medical establishment's approach to childbirth was particularly lethal, combining ignorance of basic anatomy with superstitions that actively endangered both mother and child. Medieval midwives and physicians had theories about childbirth that were not just wrong, but spectacularly, dangerously wrong. They believed that difficult births were caused by the mother's sins, that pain during childbirth was divinely mandated, and that intervention was often unnecessary or even blasphemous. Lady Margaret de Warwick died in 1384, during what should have been a routine childbirth. Her labour had been progressing normally for several hours, when the attending physician, Master Geoffrey, decided that the process was taking too long and needed to be assisted. His assistance involved reaching into the birth canal with unwashed hands and attempting to manually extract the baby. Master Geoffrey had no understanding of proper positioning, sterile technique, or basic obstetrics. His intervention caused massive internal bleeding and infection. Both Lady Margaret and her child died within hours, but Master Geoffrey recorded the incident as a case of divine displeasure, rather than medical malpractice. He continued practicing obstetrics for another 20 years, leaving a trail of dead mothers and infants throughout the English countryside. Medieval physicians also believed that mental illness was caused by demonic possession, spiritual corruption, or imbalances of the humors. Treatment for mental illness typically involved a combination of exorcism, bloodletting, and various forms of physical torture designed to drive out evil spirits. The mortality rate for mental health treatment in the medieval period was nearly 100%. Sir Baldwin de Clare developed what modern psychiatrists would recognize as depression following the death of his wife in 1376. He became withdrawn, lost interest in his usual activities, and had difficulty sleeping. His family, concerned about his behavior, consulted Master Robert, a physician known for his treatment of spiritual ailments. Master Robert diagnosed demonic possession and prescribed a treatment regimen that included daily bloodletting, regular beatings to drive out the demons, and a diet consisting only of bread and water to purify the soul. The treatment continued for 6 months, during which Sir Baldwin grew progressively weaker and more despondent. The final stage of treatment involved chaining Sir Baldwin in a cold, damp cell to prevent the demons from escaping. He died from a combination of malnutrition, infection, and exposure, but Master Robert recorded his death as evidence that the demons chose to take the patient's soul rather than be expelled. The treatment was considered so effective that Master Robert used it as his standard approach to mental illness for the rest of his career. Medieval medicine's approach to infectious disease was to assume that illness was caused by bad air or divine punishment, leading to treatments that often spread disease rather than curing it. During plague outbreaks, physicians would prescribe treatments that involved gathering large numbers of sick people in enclosed spaces, believing that concentrated prayer would cure the disease. The Great Mortality of 1348-1349s, now known as the Black Death, provided medieval physicians with countless opportunities to demonstrate their lethal incompetence. In London, Master William developed what he called humour balancing therapy for plague victims. His treatment involved bleeding patients until they were nearly unconscious, then placing them in hot baths to sweat out the corruption. The combination of blood loss and extreme heat killed plague victims faster than the plague itself. But Master William interpreted the rapid deaths as evidence that his treatment was working. It was eliminating the plague quickly, even if it was also eliminating the patients. He treated over 200 plague victims using this method, and all of them died within hours of treatment. Master William maintained detailed records of his success rate in eliminating plague symptoms, apparently not noticing that his success rate in keeping patients alive was 0. Medieval surgical procedures sometimes ventured into realms of creativity that bordered on artistic expression. Surgeons would attempt procedures that had no basis in medical necessity, but were inspired by philosophical theories or religious beliefs. The most elaborate unnecessary surgery occurred in 1392 when Master Geoffrey, a surgeon in Canterbury, decided to attempt spiritual surgery on Brother Francis, a monk who complained of feeling spiritually empty. A Master Geoffrey solution was to surgically create a spiritual cavity in Brother Francis's chest where divine grace could accumulate. The procedure involved cutting open the chest, removing several ribs, and creating a hollow space lined with silk cloth. The theory was that this cavity would fill with divine energy and cure Brother Francis's spiritual malaise. The surgery took 8 hours and was performed without anesthesia on a fully conscious patient. Brother Francis died during the procedure from shock, blood loss, and what modern doctors would recognize as massive trauma to vital organs. Master Geoffrey completed the surgery anyway, creating his spiritual cavity in Brother Francis's corpse. He recorded the procedure as technically successful and noted that the patient had achieved perfect spiritual peace through death. Medieval physicians had a particular fondness for treatments that involved exotic animal parts, believing that consuming or wearing pieces of powerful animals would transfer their strength to patients. This led to a thriving trade in animal parts that were often incorrectly identified, improperly preserved, or outright fraudulent. Lord Edmund de Grey purchased what he believed was powdered unicorn horn in 1387 to treat what modern doctors would recognize as arthritis. Unicorn horn was supposed to cure any ailment and provide eternal youth. The powder actually came from a narwhal tusk that had been ground up and mixed with various other substances, including lead compounds and mercury. Lord Edmund took daily doses of powdered unicorn horn for 6 months, gradually poisoning himself with heavy metals while believing he was achieving immortality. The mercury and lead accumulated in his organs, causing brain damage, kidney failure, and eventual death. His final weeks were marked by hallucinations, violent mood swings, and the conviction that he was transforming into a unicorn himself. He died believing that the treatment was working perfectly, and that his death was actually a transformation into a higher form of life. His physician recorded the case as a successful treatment that had elevated the patient beyond mortal concerns, which was technically accurate if you interpreted death as elevation. Medieval dentistry sometimes attempted procedures that went far beyond simple tooth extraction. Master Robert, a tooth puller in Oxford, developed what he called complete mouth reconstruction for patients with multiple dental problems. His technique involved removing all the teeth, scraping away the gums, and installing wooden teeth carved from oak and held in place with metal wires. The procedure was exactly as horrific as it sounds, involving hours of surgery performed on conscious patients with crude tools. The wooden teeth were carved to approximate the shape of real teeth, but had no connection to the patient's jaw muscles or nervous system. They were essentially decorative objects installed in patients' mouths. Master Robert performed complete mouth reconstruction on Sir Thomas de Berkeley in 1389. The surgery took 6 hours, during which Sir Thomas lost consciousness several times from pain and blood loss. The wooden teeth were installed successfully, but the metal wires used to hold them in place caused constant irritation and infection. Sir Thomas died 3 weeks after the surgery from massive infections in his mouth and throat. The wooden teeth, which had never been properly cleaned or maintained, had become breeding grounds for bacteria. Master Robert recorded the procedure as a success, noting that the patient's dental problems had been permanently resolved, which was true in the sense that dead people don't get tooth hackers. Perhaps the most comprehensively lethal medical practice of the medieval period was the use of universal cures, medicines that supposedly could treat any ailment. These compounds typically contained dozens of ingredients, many of which were toxic, combined in proportions that were determined more by availability and cost than by any medical theory. The most famous universal cure was called Venice treacle, a compound that supposedly contained over 100 different ingredients, including viper's flesh, opium, honey, wine, and various exotic spices. The theory was that this combination would cure any poison, disease, or spiritual ailment. The reality was that Venice treacle contained enough toxic substances to kill a healthy person, and enough alcohol and opium to render them unconscious while dying. Master William, a physician in York, purchased a large supply of Venice treacle in 1394 and began prescribing it for every patient who came to see him. His standard treatment was to give patients increasingly large doses of Venice treacle until their symptoms either improved or disappeared entirely. Since the symptoms usually disappeared when the patients died, Master William considered his treatment highly effective. Over the course of 2 years, Master William treated over 150 patients with Venice treacle. All of them died, usually within days of beginning treatment. Master William maintained detailed records of his success in eliminating symptoms, apparently not recognizing that death was not actually a cure. His medical journal contained entries like, "Patient's fever completely eliminated through Venice treacle treatment," and "Headache symptoms permanently resolved after 3 days of universal cure." Medieval surgery sometimes attempted procedures that were based on completely incorrect understanding of human anatomy. Surgeons would operate on the wrong organs, cut through vital structures while searching for non-existent body parts, or attempt to rearrange internal organs based on theories that had no basis in reality. Master Geoffrey, a surgeon in London, believed that the human heart was located in the center of the chest and that it could be temporarily removed, cleaned, and reinstalled to cure heart problems. This theory was based on his observation of butchered animals, where the heart is indeed easily accessible and removable. In 1385, Sir Baldwin de Warwick consulted Master Geoffrey about chest pains that were probably caused by indigestion. Master Geoffrey diagnosed corruption of the heart and recommended his heart cleaning procedure. The surgery involved cutting open Sir Baldwin's chest, locating what Master Geoffrey believed was the heart, removing it, washing it in wine, and attempting to put it back. Master Geoffrey's understanding of human anatomy was so fundamentally wrong that he removed Sir Baldwin's lungs instead of his heart, believing that the large, spongy organs he found in the chest cavity must be the heart in an inflated state. He spent several hours washing Sir Baldwin's lungs in wine, while Sir Baldwin slowly suffocated from the lack of functioning respiratory organs. Sir Baldwin died during the procedure, but Master Geoffrey maintained that the surgery had been successful because the heart had been thoroughly cleaned and purified. He recorded the case as an example of his surgical skill, noting that the patient had achieved perfect cardiac purity through death. The medieval medical establishment's approach to epidemic disease was to assume that large-scale illness was caused by divine displeasure and could be cured through collective penance and prayer. This led to medical responses that often made epidemics worse by concentrating infected people in enclosed spaces and preventing effective treatment. During a cholera outbreak in 1387, the physicians of Canterbury decided that the disease was caused by insufficient piety among the population. Their prescribed treatment was for all infected people to gather in the cathedral for continuous prayer sessions lasting several days. Patients were not allowed to leave, eat, or drink during these sessions, as these activities would interfere with the purification process. The result was predictably catastrophic. Hundreds of sick people were confined in an enclosed space without food, water, or sanitation. The disease spread rapidly through the concentrated population, and patients died from a combination of cholera, dehydration, and starvation. The physicians interpreted the high death rate as evidence that the population had been more sinful than they had initially realized. The prayer sessions continued for 2 weeks, during which nearly every participant died. The physicians recorded the outbreak as a successful example of divine justice, noting that the community had been purified of corruption, through the elimination of the infected population. They recommended their treatment method to other cities experiencing similar outbreaks. Medieval physicians sometimes attempted treatments that were based on astrological theories rather than medical observation. They believed that the position of planets and stars at the time of illness determined the appropriate treatment, leading to therapeutic approaches that changed based on astronomical events rather than patient symptoms. Master Robert, a physician in Oxford, developed an elaborate system of astrological medicine that involved prescribing different treatments based on the phase of the moon, the position of planets, and the patient's astrological sign. His treatments included bleeding patients only during certain lunar phases, administering medicines when specific stars were visible, and performing surgery only when the planets were properly aligned. This system led to some spectacularly bad timing. Sir Thomas de Warwick developed appendicitis in 1391. But Master Robert's astrological calculations indicated that surgery should be delayed until the next favourable planetary alignment, which was scheduled to occur in 3 weeks. Sir Thomas waited obediently for the planets to achieve proper configuration, while his appendix ruptured and infection spread throughout his abdominal cavity. By the time the planets were properly aligned, Sir Thomas was dying from sepsis. Master Robert performed the surgery anyway, spending several hours searching through Sir Thomas's infected abdomen for an appendix that had already burst and disintegrated. Sir Thomas died during the procedure, but Master Robert recorded it as an astrologically perfect surgery that had been undermined by the patient's insufficient faith in celestial medicine. The medieval period's approach to medical education created physicians who were highly trained in theories that were completely wrong, leading to practitioners who could confidently explain why their lethal treatments were theoretically sound. Medical schools taught elaborate systems of diagnosis and treatment based on ancient Greek theories, religious doctrine, and philosophical speculation rather than observation or experimentation. This educational system produced physicians who were absolutely certain of their methods and completely unaware of their ineffectiveness. They could cite classical authorities, quote religious texts, and provide detailed theoretical justifications for treatments that killed patients with remarkable consistency. The medieval medical establishment was a perfect example of the dangers of combining ignorance with confidence and providing it with social authority. The result was a healthcare system that was not just ineffective, but actively harmful, where seeking medical treatment significantly decreased a patient's chances of survival. Medieval physicians didn't just fail to cure diseases, they created new ways to die that were often more painful and prolonged than the original ailments. In an age where medical knowledge was based on theory rather than observation, confidence rather than competence, the practice of medicine became an elaborate system for converting treatable illnesses into fatal conditions. Medieval architecture was an ambitious art form practiced by people who had impressive theories about engineering and absolutely no understanding of physics, material science, or basic safety. Builders in the medieval period approached construction projects with the confidence of modern engineers and the technical knowledge of enthusiastic amateurs, leading to structures that were both magnificent and magnificently dangerous. The medieval period was the age of cathedral building, when entire cities would dedicate centuries and vast fortunes to constructing monuments to God that were designed to reach as close to heaven as possible. These projects were engineering marvels that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with medieval technology. And they frequently pushed those boundaries so far that the buildings fell down, often on the people who built them. The most spectacularly disastrous cathedral project occurred in Beauvais, France, where medieval architects decided in 1225 that they would build the tallest cathedral choir in Christendom. Their design called for vaulting that reached 157 feet high, supported by flying buttresses that were themselves architectural innovations. The project was ambitious, expensive, and fundamentally unsound. The cathedral builders of Beauvais were convinced that height was directly related to holiness, and they pursued vertical achievement with the dedication of people trying to literally build their way into heaven. The initial construction proceeded well, with massive stone pillars rising to unprecedented heights and elaborate flying buttresses, creating a forest of stone supports around the building. The choir was completed in 1272 and stood for exactly 12 years before the laws of physics reasserted themselves. In 1284, the entire choir collapsed during a religious service, killing 43 worshippers and injuring dozens more. The collapse was so complete that witnesses described it as the entire building falling into the earth, with stone blocks weighing several tons, each crashing down through the wooden floor into the cathedral's crypt. The builders immediately began planning a reconstruction, apparently convinced that the collapse had been caused by insufficient faith rather than excessive ambition. The rebuilt choir, completed in 1347, was designed to be even taller than the original. It lasted until 1573, when it too collapsed, this time taking several neighboring buildings with it, and creating what contemporary accounts described as artificial earthquake that could be felt for miles. Medieval castle construction was another field, where ambition regularly exceeded competence. Castle builders in the 14th century developed increasingly elaborate designs that incorporated multiple defensive systems, complex mechanical devices, and architectural features that looked impressive on paper but proved structurally unsound in practice. The Earl of Warwick decided in 1367 that his castle needed a tower that would be visible from neighbouring counties, both as a symbol of his power and as a practical military advantage. His architects designed a tower that was 300 feet tall, built on foundations that were only 15 feet deep. The tower incorporated multiple levels, elaborate windows, and a complex system of internal staircases that created what modern engineers would recognize as a structurally compromised hollow tube. Construction of the tower proceeded for 3 years, with hundreds of workers hauling stone blocks up, increasingly dangerous scaffolding systems. The tower reached its planned height in 1370 and stood for exactly 6 months before toppling over during a mild windstorm. The collapse was visible from 3 counties and created a crater in the castle courtyard that remained until the 18th century. The tower's fall killed 18 workers who were adding finishing touches to the upper levels, crushed the castle's great hall, and created such a loud crash that it was reportedly heard in London, over 100 miles away. The Earl of Warwick, who had been in the Great Hall when the tower fell, survived only because he had stepped outside moments earlier to admire his architectural achievement from a distance. Medieval bridge building was another field where engineering ambition regularly exceeded engineering competence. Medieval engineers understood the basic principles of arch construction, but they frequently attempted to span distances that exceeded their materials' capabilities, or built foundations that were inadequate for the structures they were supporting. The London Bridge project, begun in 1176, was supposed to be the most advanced bridge in Europe, incorporating 20 arches spanning the Thames River. The design included shops built directly on the bridge, multiple levels of construction, and architectural features that turned the bridge into essentially a narrow city suspended over water. The project took over 30 years to complete and killed dozens of workers during construction. The bridge's piers were built by sinking wooden caissons into the riverbed and filling them with stone, a technique that worked well in shallow water but proved problematic in the Thames's deeper sections. Several caissons collapsed during construction, drowning the workers inside and requiring the project to start over with new designs. The most spectacular construction failure occurred in 1281, when one of the bridge's arches collapsed during a ceremony celebrating the bridge's completion. The arch failed not because of structural problems, but because the celebration involved loading the bridge with far more weight than it was designed to carry. Over 500 people had gathered on the bridge for the ceremony, along with horses, carts, and elaborate decorations. The collapse happened suddenly, with the central arch dropping into the Thames, along with approximately 200 people. Contemporary accounts describe the sound as like thunder, and the sight of people, horses, and pieces of the bridge all falling into the river together. The incident was particularly tragic because many of the victims were skilled craftsmen who had worked on the bridge's construction and were attending the ceremony to celebrate their achievement. Medieval construction projects often incorporated mechanical devices that were designed to impress visitors but proved dangerous to operate. Castle builders were particularly fond of elaborate drawbridge systems, rotating staircases, and mechanical defensive devices that required complex operation and were prone to catastrophic failure. Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville installed what he called the most advanced drawbridge in England at his castle in 1354. The system involved a complex arrangement of counterweights, pulleys, and gears that allowed the drawbridge to be raised and lowered by a single operator. The mechanism was housed in a tower above the gate and included multiple safety features designed to prevent accidental operation. The drawbridge system worked perfectly for 2 years, impressing visitors with its smooth operation and innovative design. The problems began when Sir Geoffrey decided to modify the system to make it operate faster. His modifications involved removing several of the safety features and adding additional counterweights to increase the bridge's lifting speed. The modified system was tested in 1356 during a visit from the local bishop, who was supposed to be impressed by the technological achievement. The test began normally, with the drawbridge rising smoothly from its lowered position. Halfway up, the additional counterweights caused the entire mechanism to accelerate beyond its designed limits. The drawbridge shot upward with such force that it broke free from its hinges and flew over the castle walls, landing in the moat with a splash that soaked spectators on both sides of the water. The counterweight system, suddenly freed from the bridge's resistance, spun out of control and destroyed the tower housing, killing the operator and severely damaging the castle's gate structure. Sir Geoffrey and his guests survived, but the bishop was so unimpressed by the demonstration that he refused to stay for dinner. The drawbridge was never replaced, and the castle gate remained permanently open for the rest of Sir Geoffrey's life, rather defeating the purpose of having a castle in the first place. Medieval construction workers developed increasingly elaborate scaffolding systems that allowed them to work at great heights, but provided minimal safety. These scaffolding systems were marvels of medieval engineering that were both ingenious and incredibly dangerous, held together by rope, prayer, and complete ignorance of safety regulations. The scaffolding for Notre Dame de Paris, constructed during the 12th and 13th centuries, was itself an architectural achievement that rose over 200 feet above the ground. The system incorporated multiple levels, complex bracing systems, and innovative techniques for moving heavy stones to great heights. It was also completely unregulated, with workers climbing on structures that would be considered death traps by modern standards. The most spectacular scaffolding failure occurred in 1248, when a section of the Notre Dame scaffolding collapsed during construction of the cathedral's south tower. The collapse was caused by workers overloading a platform with stone blocks while simultaneously removing supporting braces that they thought were unnecessary. The failure happened in a cascade, with one platform's collapse causing adjacent platforms to fail in sequence. Over 300 feet of scaffolding came down in under a minute, taking with it 47 workers and several tons of carved stone that had taken months to prepare. The crash was so loud that it stopped work on construction projects throughout Paris, as workers everywhere assumed that the end of the world had arrived. Medieval architects sometimes designed buildings that were structurally impossible, but looked impressive in drawings. These designs were often approved by patrons who were more interested in architectural bragging rights than structural integrity, leading to construction projects that were doomed from the moment ground was broken. The Duke of Lancaster commissioned what he called the most beautiful Great Hall in England in 1378, designed to showcase his wealth and sophistication. His architects created a design that featured a vaulted ceiling 80 feet high, supported by columns that were deliberately made as thin as possible to create an impression of lightness and elegance. The hall's design called for stone columns that were only 18 inches in diameter, supporting a roof that weighed over 200 tons. Modern engineers would immediately recognize this as structurally impossible. But medieval architects were convinced that the beauty of the design would somehow overcome the limitations of physics. Construction proceeded for 5 years, with the columns rising to their planned height and the roof framework being installed according to the original design. The Great Hall was completed in 1383 and collapsed during its inaugural feast, which was attended by over 300 guests, including several minor royalty. The collapse occurred during the main course, when the ceiling suddenly cracked, with a sound that witnesses compared to thunder. The roof came down in sections, with massive stone blocks falling into the dining area below. The Duke of Lancaster survived because he had been standing near a window making a toast when the collapse began. But 73 of his guests were killed, including 2 earls and a bishop. The Duke immediately commissioned a new Great Hall, with architects who promised to build something even more impressive than the original. The second hall, completed in 1391, featured even thinner columns and an even higher ceiling. It lasted 8 months, before collapsing during a Christmas celebration, killing the Duke himself along with most of his family. Medieval construction projects often incorporated experimental techniques that were based on theoretical principles rather than practical testing. Builders would attempt innovative approaches to engineering problems without understanding the consequences, leading to structures that failed in spectacular and often lethal ways. Master William, a master mason in York, developed what he believed was a revolutionary technique for building stone arches in 1365. His innovation involved building arches that were intentionally weakened in certain areas, based on his theory that flexible stone structures would be stronger than rigid ones. Master William's technique involved carving deliberate gaps in arch stones, creating what he called breathing spaces that would allow the structure to flex under load. He was convinced that rigid arches were prone to sudden failure, while flexible arches would bend rather than break under stress. His first project using the flexible arch technique was a bridge over the River Ouse, designed to replace an older wooden bridge that had been destroyed by floods. The new bridge incorporated Master William's breathing space arches and was considered a masterpiece of innovative engineering. The bridge was completed in 1367 and tested by having a procession of loaded carts cross simultaneously to demonstrate its strength. The test began well, with the bridge showing no signs of stress, as the first several carts crossed without incident. The problems began when the bridge started flexing, exactly as Master William had designed it to do. The breathing spaces in the arches allowed the bridge to bend under load, but Master William had not considered what would happen when a flexible stone structure bent too far. The bridge began swaying in the wind, created by its own flexing, with each movement increasing the stress on the deliberately weakened joints. The bridge collapsed during the test, with the flexible arches folding up like accordion bellows and dropping the entire structure into the river. 12 carts, 24 horses, and 18 people disappeared into the river Ouse along with Master William's revolutionary bridge design. Master William himself, who had been standing on the bridge directing the test, was crushed by his own innovative arches. Medieval construction projects sometimes incorporated artistic elements that were more dangerous than decorative. Builders would install elaborate carved decorations, complex mechanical sculptures, or architectural features that looked impressive but proved structurally hazardous. The Cathedral of St. E. Tyne in Limoges featured an elaborate mechanical clock, installed in 1389, that was designed to be both a timepiece and a religious display. The clock incorporated dozens of moving figures, mechanical bells, and a complex system of weights and gears that occupied an entire tower. The clock was operated by a system of hanging weights that had to be manually wound every day by climbing to the top of the tower and operating a series of cranks and pulleys. The mechanism was so complex that it required a full-time operator who lived in a small room adjacent to the clock works. Brother Francis, the clock's operator, had been maintaining the mechanism for 3 years when he decided in 1392 that it needed improvement. The clock occasionally ran slow, and Brother Francis was convinced that this was due to insufficient weight in the driving system. His solution was to add additional weights to make the clock run more accurately. Brother Francis installed increasingly heavy weights over several months, gradually making the clock run faster and more precisely. The additional weight also put increasing stress on the tower's structure. But Brother Francis was focused on timekeeping accuracy rather than architectural integrity. The tower collapsed in 1393 during the clock's noon performance, when all the mechanical figures were supposed to emerge and perform an elaborate sequence commemorating Christ's crucifixion. The additional weights had finally exceeded the tower's structural capacity, causing the entire clock tower to fold in on itself. Brother Francis died instantly, crushed by the mechanical clock he had spent years perfecting. The collapse also destroyed a section of the cathedral's nave and killed 15 worshippers who had gathered to watch the clock's noon performance. The clock itself was completely destroyed, its elaborate mechanical figures scattered across the cathedral grounds like the remains of a mechanical army. Perhaps the most comprehensively stupid construction disaster of the medieval period occurred in 1396, when the Earl of Northumberland decided to build what he called the world's first mechanical castle. His design incorporated every innovative construction technique that medieval engineers had developed, combined into a single structure that was supposed to be both impregnable and automated. The mechanical castle featured drawbridges that operated automatically when approached by recognized visitors, walls that could extend or retract based on the level of threat, and towers that rotated to track potential enemies. The entire system was controlled by a massive mechanical computer built from gears, weights, and levers housed in the castle's central keep. Construction took 7 years and consumed the Earl's entire fortune, requiring innovations in metallurgy, engineering, and mechanical design that pushed medieval technology to its absolute limits. The castle was completed in 1403 and was considered the most advanced fortress in Europe. The mechanical castle worked perfectly for exactly 1 day. On the second day of operation, a minor malfunction in the mechanical computer caused the automated systems to begin operating randomly. Drawbridges raised and lowered continuously, walls extended and retracted without pattern, and the rotating towers spun wildly in all directions. The Earl of Northumberland was trapped inside his own castle when the drawbridges malfunctioned in the raised position and the walls extended to block all the windows. The mechanical systems, designed to be tamper-proof, could not be manually overridden. The Earl spent 3 days trapped in his own technological marvel before the mechanical computer finally wound down and the systems stopped operating. When the drawbridges finally lowered, rescue workers found that the Earl had died of thirst and starvation, trapped inside the most advanced castle ever built. The mechanical systems had consumed so much energy that they had drained the castle's water supply, and the automated defenses had prevented anyone from bringing food or water to the Earl. The mechanical castle was abandoned immediately after the Earl's death, as no one understood how to operate or maintain its systems. It stood empty for 50 years before finally collapsing when the mechanical computer's support structure failed, bringing down the entire central keep and most of the surrounding walls. Medieval construction disasters weren't limited to grand architectural projects. Ordinary buildings killed people with remarkable regularity due to poor materials, inadequate foundations, and complete ignorance of basic engineering principles. Houses, shops, and workshops collapsed with such frequency that building collapse was considered a normal hazard of urban life. The medieval approach to construction combined ambitious designs, primitive materials, inadequate tools, and non-existent safety standards to create perfect conditions for catastrophic structural failure. Builders learned their craft through trial and error, with the errors often proving fatal to both builders and occupants. In an age when engineering was based on tradition rather than calculation, when materials were tested by using them rather than analyzing them, and when safety was considered a matter of divine providence rather than human planning, construction projects became elaborate experiments in applied gravity. Medieval builders didn't just construct buildings, they constructed disasters waiting to happen. Monuments to human ambition that were often destined to become tombstones for human folly. Medieval religious practice was characterized by extreme piety, elaborate rituals, and a remarkable talent for turning spiritual devotion into mortal peril. This was an age when religious fervor could literally be deadly, when the pursuit of holiness regularly led to entirely unholy deaths, and when the road to salvation was paved with the bodies of the overzealous faithful. The medieval church encouraged various forms of extreme religious practice that were designed to demonstrate devotion through suffering. These practices included extended fasting, self-flagellation, pilgrimages to dangerous locations, and various forms of ascetic behavior that often pushed practitioners beyond the limits of human endurance. Religious fasting was considered one of the most effective ways to purify the soul and demonstrate devotion to God. Medieval saints were famous for their ability to survive on minimal food for extended periods, and many religious practitioners attempted to emulate these examples of holy starvation. The results were predictably lethal. Brother Thomas, a monk at Canterbury Cathedral, decided in 1367 that he would demonstrate his devotion by attempting to fast for 40 days, matching Christ's fast in the wilderness. His plan was to consume nothing but water and occasional pieces of bread, gradually reducing his intake until he was surviving on prayer alone. Brother Thomas began his fast with great enthusiasm and the support of his fellow monks, who considered his attempt a valuable spiritual exercise. The first week proceeded well, with Brother Thomas experiencing the usual symptoms of hunger, but maintaining his dedication to the project. The second week brought weakness and difficulty concentrating, but Brother Thomas interpreted these as signs that his soul was being purified. By the third week, Brother Thomas was experiencing hallucinations, severe muscle weakness, and episodes of unconsciousness, but he remained convinced that these were spiritual visions and divine communications. His fellow monks, equally ignorant of nutrition, encouraged him to continue, believing that his suffering was bringing him closer to God. Brother Thomas died on the 32nd day of his fast, his body having consumed its own muscle tissue and organs to survive. His fellow monks initially believed that his death was a form of divine transformation and prepared to declare him a saint. It was only when Brother Thomas's body began to decompose with unusual rapidity that they realized his fast had been too successful. He had indeed purified himself of all earthly substances, including the ones necessary for life. Self-flagellation was another popular form of religious devotion that regularly proved fatal. Medieval Christians would whip themselves with various implements as a form of penance, believing that physical suffering would cleanse them of sin and bring them closer to God's grace. The practice was so popular that groups of flagellants would travel from town to town, conducting public whipping ceremonies that attracted large crowds. The most enthusiastic flagellants developed increasingly elaborate techniques for self-harm, using whips embedded with metal spikes, chains weighted with lead, and various other devices designed to maximize suffering and therefore spiritual benefit. The theory was that greater physical pain would result in greater spiritual purification. Brother Francis, a member of a flagellant order in Germany, developed what he believed was the ultimate flagellation technique in 1379. His innovation involved a whip with metal barbs that were deliberately designed to remain embedded in flesh, creating continuous pain that would serve as a constant reminder of Christ's suffering. Brother Francis used his enhanced whip daily for several months, gradually escalating the intensity of his self-flagellation as his tolerance for pain increased. The metal barbs caused increasingly severe wounds that became infected, but Brother Francis interpreted the infections as signs that his body was purging itself of sin. His daily flagellation sessions became public performances that attracted crowds of admirers who considered Brother Francis a living saint. The audiences encouraged increasingly extreme demonstrations, and Brother Francis obliged by developing new techniques for maximizing his suffering. Brother Francis died from sepsis, caused by the infected wounds from his enhanced whip, but not before spending several weeks in a state of delirium that his followers interpreted as divine ecstasy. His final flagellation session was performed while he was unconscious from fever, supported by assistants who helped him maintain his spiritual discipline, even while dying. The crowd interpreted Brother Francis's death during flagellation as a form of martyrdom, and immediately began treating his whip as a religious relic. Several members of the audience took pieces of the bloodied whip and attempted to replicate Brother Francis's technique, leading to a minor epidemic of self-inflicted deaths throughout the region. Medieval pilgrimages were designed to be spiritually challenging journeys that would test the faithful's dedication through hardship and danger. Pilgrims would travel hundreds or thousands of miles to visit holy sites, often under conditions that were guaranteed to test their faith and frequently their mortality. Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville decided in 1384 that he would undertake a pilgrimage to Jerusalem that would surpass all previous examples of religious devotion. His plan was to walk the entire distance from England to the Holy Land while carrying a wooden cross that weighed over 100 pounds, eating only what he could beg, and sleeping only in the open air regardless of weather conditions. Sir Geoffrey's pilgrimage began with great ceremony, as local religious authorities blessed his journey and provided him with a wooden cross that had been specially constructed for the purpose. The cross was made from English oak and measured 12 feet in length, making it both spiritually significant and physically impossible to carry for extended distances. The pilgrimage proceeded normally for the first several weeks, with Sir Geoffrey making steady progress through England, while attracting crowds of admirers who considered his dedication inspiring. Problems began when he reached the English Channel and realized that his wooden cross made ship travel essentially impossible. Sir Geoffrey's solution was to construct a raft and attempt to cross the channel while towing his cross behind him. The plan was spiritually ambitious but practically suicidal, as Sir Geoffrey had no sailing experience and the wooden cross created enough drag to make the raft uncontrollable in anything stronger than a gentle breeze. Sir Geoffrey launched his raft during what appeared to be calm weather, but channel conditions changed rapidly once he was away from shore. The cross, which he had tied to the raft with rope, acted like a sea anchor, preventing him from making progress toward France and eventually pulling the raft backwards toward the English coast. Sir Geoffrey was found 3 days later, drowned and still tied to his wooden cross, which had apparently dragged him under when the raft overturned. His body washed ashore near Dover, and local authorities initially assumed he had been the victim of a shipwreck until they noticed the cross and realized what had happened. The church declared Sir Geoffrey's death a form of martyrdom, as he had died while attempting to reach the Holy Land. His wooden cross was installed in Canterbury Cathedral as a memorial, though church authorities were careful not to encourage other pilgrims to attempt similar water crossings. Medieval religious ceremonies often incorporated dangerous elements that were designed to demonstrate faith through physical risk. These ceremonies included fire walking, snake handling, and various other practices that put participants in genuine danger while promising spiritual rewards for those who survived. The most elaborate dangerous ceremony occurred annually at the Cathedral of St. Bartholomew in France, where the faithful would participate in a ritual called the Trial of Faith. The ceremony involved participants walking across a pit filled with burning coals while carrying religious relics, demonstrating their faith through their willingness to risk being burned alive. The Trial of Faith was popular among medieval Christians who believed that God would protect the truly faithful from harm. The ceremony was conducted with great solemnity, with participants fasting for days beforehand and spending hours in prayer to prepare themselves spiritually for the ordeal. Brother Benedict volunteered for the Trial of Faith in 1392, convinced that his years of religious devotion would protect him from the flames. He had spent weeks preparing spiritually, fasting, praying, and purifying himself through various religious exercises. His fellow monks considered him an ideal candidate for the ceremony. The trial began normally, with Brother Benedict approaching the pit of burning coals with confidence and serenity. The pit was approximately 20 feet long and filled with glowing coals that had been burning for several hours to achieve maximum heat. Brother Benedict began his walk carrying a golden reliquary containing what was supposed to be fragments of saints' bones. Brother Benedict made it approximately halfway across the pit before his sandals caught fire, igniting his robes and causing him to stumble into the coals. The reliquary fell into the flames, and Brother Benedict was unable to climb out of the pit due to his burning clothing and the intense heat of the coals. The watching crowd initially assumed that Brother Benedict's fall was part of the ceremony and that he would emerge miraculously unharmed. It was only when his screaming continued for several minutes that observers realized something had gone wrong. By the time they organized a rescue attempt, Brother Benedict had been burned to death. Church authorities declared that Brother Benedict's death was due to insufficient faith rather than excessive heat, and the Trial of Faith continued to be performed annually for another century. The ceremony was only discontinued when so many participants had been burned to death that it became difficult to find volunteers. Medieval religious architecture often incorporated elements that were more dangerous than devotional. Churches and monasteries were designed to inspire awe and demonstrate divine power, but they frequently did so through structural features that were actively hazardous to worshippers and clergy. The Cathedral of Sainting Maximilian featured an elaborate system of mechanical angels that were designed to fly around the cathedral during religious services. The angels were life-sized wooden figures operated by hidden pulleys and cables, creating the illusion that divine messengers were participating in the liturgy. The mechanical angels were controlled by a complex system installed in the cathedral's bell tower, where operators would pull ropes and turn cranks to make the figures move through the air above the congregation. The system required precise timing and coordination to create effective religious theatre. Brother Lawrence was the cathedral's chief angel operator, responsible for coordinating the movements of 12 mechanical angels during major religious ceremonies. He had developed increasingly elaborate choreography for the angels, with complex flight patterns that required split-second timing to avoid collisions between the wooden figures. During Easter services in 1395, Brother Lawrence attempted his most ambitious angel performance, with all 12 figures performing a synchronized aerial dance above the altar. The performance required him to operate multiple control systems simultaneously while maintaining perfect timing for the entire sequence. The performance began successfully, with the mechanical angels moving gracefully through their choreographed routine, while the congregation watched in amazement. Problems began when one of the angels' cables became tangled with another, causing both figures to swing out of control and crash into a third angel. The collision created a chain reaction that brought down the entire angel system, with wooden figures, cables, and pulleys crashing into the congregation below. Brother Lawrence, who was attempting to untangle the cables from his position in the bell tower, was pulled from his platform when one of the main cables snapped under the weight of multiple falling angels. Brother Lawrence fell 60 feet from the bell tower, landing in the cathedral's nave, surrounded by the wreckage of his mechanical angels. 6 members of the congregation were killed by falling angels, and dozens more were injured by debris from the collapsed pulley system. The cathedral authorities declared the disaster a sign of divine displeasure, with excessive mechanical complexity in religious services. The mechanical angels were never rebuilt, and Brother Lawrence was buried alongside pieces of the wooden figures that had killed him. Medieval religious festivals often featured processions that were designed to be spiritually uplifting, but proved physically dangerous. These events involved large crowds, elaborate costumes, religious relics, and various activities that combined to create perfect conditions for mass casualties. The Festival of St. Dunstan in Canterbury featured an annual procession where participants would carry a massive wooden cross through the city streets. The cross, which measured 30 feet in height and weighed over 500 pounds, required coordinated effort from dozens of participants to move safely through narrow medieval streets. The 1389 Festival of St. Dunstan attracted the largest crowd in the event's history, with over 1,000 participants eager to demonstrate their devotion by helping to carry the sacred cross. The procession route had been planned to pass through the city's main streets, allowing maximum visibility for the religious demonstration. The procession began normally, with the massive cross being lifted by volunteers and carried slowly through the streets, while crowds of spectators gathered to watch. The cross was supported by wooden poles held by participants walking alongside, creating a moving forest of people and wooden supports. Problems began when the procession reached Canterbury's Market Square, where the crowd of spectators had grown too large for the available space. People pressed forward to get closer to the sacred cross, gradually reducing the maneuvering room available to the participants carrying it. The cross became increasingly difficult to control as the crowd pressed closer, with participants unable to coordinate their movements effectively in the confined space. When someone in the crowd stumbled and fell, it created a chain reaction that caused dozens of people to lose their footing simultaneously. The participants carrying the cross were knocked off balance by the falling crowd, causing them to lose control of the massive wooden structure. The cross fell into the crowd, crushing 17 people and injuring dozens more before coming to rest across the market square. The weight of the cross made it impossible to lift quickly, and several of the injured people were trapped beneath it for over an hour before enough volunteers could be organized to raise it again. The festival was immediately cancelled, and the sacred cross was broken up for firewood rather than risk another disaster. Medieval religious art sometimes incorporated elements that were intended to inspire devotion but proved hazardous to both artists and viewers. Churches commissioned elaborate frescoes, sculptures, and decorative elements that often required dangerous materials or installation techniques. Master Giovanni, an Italian artist working in England, was commissioned in 1387 to create a fresco depicting the Last Judgment for the cathedral at Winchester. His design called for elaborate use of gold leaf, expensive pigments, and innovative painting techniques that would make the fresco the most magnificent religious art in England. Master Giovanni's innovation involved painting portions of the fresco with phosphorescent materials that would glow in the dark, creating what he believed would be a miraculous effect that would inspire viewers with divine awe. The phosphorescent materials were experimental compounds that Master Giovanni had developed himself, based on alchemical theories rather than practical knowledge. The fresco took 2 years to complete, and was indeed magnificent, with glowing elements that seemed to move and shift in candlelight. The phosphorescent sections depicted angels and divine figures that appeared to be radiating heavenly light, creating an effect that amazed viewers and established Master Giovanni's reputation throughout Europe. The problems with the phosphorescent fresco became apparent several months after its completion, when people began noticing that extended viewing of the glowing sections caused severe eye irritation, headaches, and eventually blindness. Master Giovanni himself was the first victim, gradually losing his sight after spending months working on the luminous portions of the painting. The phosphorescent compounds turned out to be radioactive materials that Master Giovanni had discovered without understanding their properties. The fresco was slowly poisoning viewers with radiation exposure, causing symptoms that medieval physicians attributed to divine punishment for insufficient piety. Master Giovanni died in 1390 from what modern doctors would recognize as radiation poisoning, but what medieval physicians recorded as divine consumption, caused by working too closely with heavenly materials. The fresco continued to poison viewers for another century before it was finally covered with conventional paint to stop the mysterious epidemic of blindness among cathedral visitors. Medieval religious music often incorporated mechanical devices and elaborate performances that were designed to enhance worship, but frequently proved dangerous to performers. Churches installed complex organ systems, mechanical choirs, and various other innovations that turned religious services into technological demonstrations. The Abbey of Stein. Dinas installed what was called the most advanced organ in Christendom in 1393, featuring over 1,000 pipes, multiple keyboards, and a mechanical system that could produce sounds no human organist could create manually. The organ was operated by a combination of keyboard playing and mechanical automation that required extensive training to master. Brother Augustine was the abbey's master organist, responsible for operating the complex mechanical system during religious services. The organ's most impressive feature was a mechanism that could play multiple melodies simultaneously while producing special effects like thunder, wind sounds, and what was supposed to be angelic voices. The organ system was powered by a massive bellows operated by 6 monks working in shifts to maintain air pressure. The mechanical portions were controlled by Brother Augustine through a system of levers, pedals, and keyboard combinations that required precise timing and coordination. During Easter services in 1396, Brother Augustine attempted to perform the organ's most complex musical program, featuring all of its mechanical capabilities in a single performance that was supposed to recreate the sounds of heaven itself. The performance required him to operate multiple control systems while coordinating with the bellows operators and monitoring the mechanical devices. The performance began successfully, with the organ producing magnificent music that filled the abbey with sound unlike anything the congregation had ever heard. The mechanical effects added thunder, wind, and angelic voices that seemed to transform the abbey into a glimpse of the divine realm. The disaster occurred when Brother Augustine attempted to activate all of the organ's mechanical systems simultaneously, creating a demand for air pressure that exceeded the bellows operator's ability to supply. The sudden drop in air pressure caused the organ's largest pipes to collapse inward, creating a vacuum effect that pulled Brother Augustine into the organ's mechanical system. Brother Augustine was crushed by the organ's machinery, while the mechanical systems continued to operate, creating what witnesses described as a horrifying combination of beautiful music and human screaming. The organ continued playing automatically for several minutes after Brother Augustine's death, as the mechanical systems had been designed to complete their programmed sequences regardless of operator input. The organ was never repaired after Brother Augustine's death, as no one else understood how to operate its complex mechanical systems safely. The abbey returned to simple chant, and the elaborate organ was eventually broken up for scrap metal. Perhaps the most comprehensively fatal religious practice of the medieval period was the custom of holy competitions, where religious practitioners would compete to demonstrate their devotion through increasingly extreme acts of piety. These competitions were popular among both clergy and laypeople, who would attempt to outdo each other in fasting, prayer, self-mortification, and various other forms of religious extremism. The most elaborate holy competition occurred in 1398 at the monastery of St. Bartholomew, where 12 monks decided to compete to determine who could demonstrate the greatest devotion to God. The competition involved multiple categories, including fasting, prayer duration, self-flagellation intensity, and creative forms of self-denial. The competition was structured as a tournament, with monks competing in pairs and advancing through elimination rounds until a single winner was determined. Each round required participants to exceed their previous achievements, gradually escalating the level of religious extremism until the competition became a systematic program of self-destruction. Brother Thomas won the fasting competition by surviving on nothing but water for 38 days, outlasting Brother Francis, who died on day 35. Brother Benedict triumphed in the prayer duration category by praying continuously for 72 hours before collapsing from exhaustion and dehydration. The self-flagellation competition was won by Brother Matthew, who developed a technique involving multiple whips used simultaneously to maximize the spiritual benefit of physical suffering. He outlasted his competitors by continuing his flagellation session even after losing consciousness, supported by assistants who helped him maintain the proper rhythm. The creative self-denial category proved most innovative, with monks competing to devise new forms of spiritual discipline that had never been attempted before. Brother Lawrence won by spending a week buried alive in the monastery garden, emerging only briefly each day for prayer and minimal sustenance. The final round of the competition involved combining all forms of devotional practice simultaneously, with the 2 surviving monks required to fast, pray continuously, flagellate themselves, and perform creative self-denial while competing to see who could maintain these practices longest. Both final competitors died during the ultimate competition, having pushed their bodies beyond all biological limits in pursuit of spiritual victory. Brother Thomas, the fasting champion, died first from starvation, combined with exhaustion from continuous prayer. Brother Matthew, the flagellation expert, survived 12 hours longer before succumbing to blood loss and infection. The holy competition was declared a spiritual success, as both winners had achieved perfect devotion through death. The monastery authorities decided that such competitions were too effective at producing religious results and banned future events to prevent the complete elimination of their monastic community. Medieval religious practices created a perfect storm of devotion, ignorance, and mortality that turned the pursuit of salvation into a systematic program of self-destruction. In an age when spiritual achievement was measured by willingness to suffer, when religious innovation meant finding new ways to risk death for God, and when competition extended even to matters of faith, the medieval church managed to turn religion itself into one of the most dangerous activities available to human beings. The pursuit of holiness became a pursuit of creative ways to die, with religious practitioners competing to see who could find the most elaborate, painful, and spiritually significant ways to kill themselves. Medieval religion didn't just promise salvation in the afterlife, it frequently delivered immediate transportation there. Whether the faithful were ready or not, medieval court life was a delicate dance of politics, romance, honor, and sudden death, where the wrong word could start a war, and the wrong fashion choice could end a life. This was an age when courtly behavior was governed by elaborate codes of conduct that were designed to promote civilization, but frequently promoted violence, where the pursuit of honor regularly led to dishonorable deaths, and where the most refined members of society found the most refined ways to kill each other. The medieval court was a place where appearance was everything and substance was optional, where a single social misstep could result in exile, imprisonment, or execution, and where the competition for royal favor created an environment of perpetual intrigue that made survival as much a matter of luck as skill. Courtiers spent their lives walking on tightropes made of protocol, etiquette, and royal whim, and many of them fell to their deaths. Medieval dueling was the aristocratic solution to disputes that couldn't be resolved through diplomacy, negotiation, or common sense. The code of honor that governed medieval nobility required that insults be answered with violence, that challenges be accepted regardless of their stupidity, and that personal disputes be settled through combat, even when both parties would obviously benefit from simply avoiding each other. The most spectacularly stupid duel of the medieval period occurred in 1387 between Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville and Sir Baldwin de Clare, two English knights who had developed a rivalry over a woman who was married to neither of them and interested in both of them even less. The dispute began when Sir Geoffrey commented that Sir Baldwin's horse was adequately groomed, which Sir Baldwin interpreted as a mortal insult to his horsemanship. Sir Baldwin immediately challenged Sir Geoffrey to single combat, demanding satisfaction for the implied criticism of his equestrian skills. Sir Geoffrey, who had intended his comment as a compliment, tried to explain the misunderstanding, but Sir Baldwin insisted that his honor had been impugned and could only be restored through violence. The duel was arranged according to strict protocols, with both knights agreeing to fight on horseback with lances, followed by combat on foot with swords, if either survived the initial charge. The combat was to be fought to the death, as Sir Baldwin insisted that anything less would fail to adequately restore his reputation as a horseman. The duel took place before a gathered crowd of nobles who had come to witness what everyone expected would be a brief and decisive combat between two skilled knights. Both participants were experienced warriors with impressive records in tournaments and actual warfare, making the contest appear evenly matched. The combat began with both knights charging at each other, with lances lowered, following standard tournament protocol. Sir Geoffrey's lance struck Sir Baldwin squarely in the chest, knocking him from his horse and apparently winning the duel cleanly. Sir Baldwin lay motionless on the ground, while Sir Geoffrey raised his lance in victory. The victory celebration was premature. Sir Baldwin's fall had been awkward, and his heavy armor had caused him to land on his own sword, which pierced through a gap in his armor plates and killed him instantly. Sir Geoffrey, meanwhile, had been so focused on his successful lance strike that he failed to notice a low, hanging tree branch, which struck him in the head and knocked him unconscious. Sir Geoffrey fell from his horse and landed on Sir Baldwin's lance, which was still embedded in the ground where it had fallen during the initial charge. The lance point pierced Sir Geoffrey's armor and killed him within minutes of his victory. Both duelists died from their duel, but neither was killed by his opponent. The gathered nobles initially assumed that the double death was some form of divine judgment on the stupidity of the original dispute. Contemporary chroniclers recorded the event as an example of how God punished those who fought over trivial matters, though they were careful not to question the institution of dueling itself. Medieval tournaments were elaborate sporting events that combined military training, social competition, and ritualized violence into spectacles that regularly killed participants and spectators alike. These events were designed to showcase knightly skill and valor, but they frequently showcased knightly stupidity and mortality instead. The Tournament of the Golden Rose, held in France in 1389, was supposed to be the most magnificent tournament of the century, featuring knights from across Europe competing for prizes that included gold, land grants, and the favor of noble ladies. The tournament incorporated multiple events, including jousting, melee combat, and various contests of skill that were designed to test every aspect of knightly ability. Sir Thomas de Berkeley entered the tournament with high expectations. Having spent months preparing for the competition and commissioning new armor that was supposed to make him invincible in combat. His armor was a masterpiece of medieval metallurgy, featuring articulated joints, reinforced plates, and decorative elements that made him look like a mobile fortress. The problem with Sir Thomas's new armor was that it was too effective at protecting him. The armor was so heavy and restrictive that he could barely move, and so well sealed that he couldn't see clearly through the visor. The armor had been designed for appearance rather than functionality, creating a suit that looked impressive but made effective combat nearly impossible. Sir Thomas's first tournament event was the Joust, where he was scheduled to compete against Sir Geoffrey de Montfort, a skilled knight with a reputation for tactical innovation. Sir Geoffrey had studied Sir Thomas's new armor and developed a strategy specifically designed to exploit its weaknesses. The joust began normally, with both knights charging toward each other with lances ready. Sir Geoffrey's strategy was to avoid direct contact and instead attempt to tire Sir Thomas by forcing him to maneuver his heavy armor through multiple passes. The plan was to exhaust Sir Thomas and then attack when he was too tired to defend effectively. The strategy worked perfectly until the third pass, when Sir Thomas's armor proved so restrictive that he couldn't control his horse effectively and charged directly into the wooden barrier, separating the jousting lanes. The impact was so severe that Sir Thomas was knocked unconscious. His horse was killed instantly, and his lance shattered into pieces that flew into the crowd of spectators. Sir Thomas survived the initial crash, but was trapped inside his armor, which had been dented by the impact and could no longer be opened. He suffocated inside his own protective equipment, while spectators and tournament officials spent over an hour trying to cut him free. His armor had protected him from external injuries, but had become a metal coffin that killed him through its own effectiveness. Medieval court ceremonies often incorporated elements of danger that were considered essential for proper pageantry. Royal feasts, religious celebrations, and state occasions featured elaborate displays that combined luxury, artistry, and various activities that put participants at genuine risk while demonstrating the wealth and power of their hosts. The coronation of King Charles VI of France in 1380 featured what court historians described as the most magnificent ceremony in Christian history, incorporating religious ritual, political symbolism, and entertainment designed to establish the new king's legitimacy and power. The ceremony included multiple processions, elaborate banquets, and various spectacles that were supposed to demonstrate divine approval of Charles's rule. The most impressive element of the coronation ceremony was a mechanical pageant that told the story of French royal history through moving sculptures, elaborate stage effects, and live performances that transformed the cathedral into a theatre of royal propaganda. The pageant featured dozens of performers, complex mechanical devices, and special effects that had taken months to prepare. The pageant's climactic scene involved a mechanical angel descending from the cathedral's vaulting to crown a figure representing Charlemagne, demonstrating the continuity between past and present French rulers. The angel was operated by an elaborate pulley system controlled from the cathedral's bell tower, with multiple operators coordinating the figure's descent and movements. Brother Francis was responsible for operating the mechanical angel during the coronation ceremony. He had rehearsed the sequence dozens of times and was confident in his ability to create a flawless performance that would impress the assembled nobles and foreign dignitaries. The ceremony proceeded normally until the climactic angel scene, when Brother Francis began lowering the mechanical figure toward the altar, where the actor representing Charlemagne was waiting to be crowned. The angel descended smoothly for the first 30 feet, creating exactly the ethereal effect that had been planned. The disaster occurred when the angel's pulley system jammed halfway through its descent, leaving the mechanical figure suspended motionless above the altar. Brother Francis attempted to unjam the mechanism by applying additional force to the control ropes, but his efforts only made the situation worse. The mechanical angel suddenly broke free from its jammed position and plummeted toward the altar. striking the actor representing Charlemagne and killing him instantly. The angel's impact also damaged the altar, scattered the ceremonial objects, and created a crater in the cathedral floor that remained visible for centuries. King Charles VI was standing near the altar when the mechanical angel fell and was struck by debris from the impact. He survived, but was knocked unconscious and suffered head injuries that may have contributed to the mental illness that plagued him throughout his reign. The coronation ceremony was completed despite the mechanical angel disaster, but contemporary chroniclers noted that the incident was widely interpreted as a bad omen for the new king's reign. The mechanical angel was never repaired, and future royal ceremonies relied on human performers rather than mechanical devices. Medieval courtly love was an elaborate system of romantic idealization that encouraged knights to pursue unattainable women through increasingly dangerous and often fatal demonstrations of devotion. This literary and social convention transformed romantic attraction into a form of competitive suicide, with lovers competing to find the most elaborate and self-destructive ways to prove their passion. Sir Lancelot de Lac, not the legendary knight, but a real person who had adopted the famous name, decided in 1394 that he would demonstrate his love for Lady Eleanor de Montfort by performing a series of increasingly dangerous feats that would prove his devotion beyond all doubt. Lady Eleanor was married, uninterested in Sir Lancelot's attention, and had explicitly asked him to leave her alone. But medieval courtly love conventions required that these obstacles only increase the intensity of his pursuit. Sir Lancelot's campaign of romantic demonstration began with relatively conventional gestures like composing poetry, participating in tournaments in Lady Eleanor's honour, and sending her expensive gifts that she consistently returned unopened. When these traditional approaches failed to win her affection, Sir Lancelot decided that more extreme measures were necessary. His escalating demonstrations of love included fasting for increasingly long periods while contemplating Lady Eleanor's beauty, sleeping outdoors in winter weather while dreaming of her warmth, and wearing her colours during dangerous military campaigns, where he deliberately sought the most hazardous combat situations. Sir Lancelot's most elaborate romantic gesture was his decision to walk barefoot from his castle to Lady Eleanor's residence, a distance of over 200 miles, while carrying a heavy wooden cross inscribed with poetry dedicated to her beauty. The journey was designed to demonstrate both his devotion and his willingness to suffer for love. The pilgrimage of love began in winter, with Sir Lancelot setting out in freezing weather, wearing only light clothing, so that his suffering would be more acute and therefore more romantic. He carried the wooden cross on his back while walking along muddy, frozen roads that were barely passable even for properly equipped travellers. Sir Lancelot completed approximately half of his romantic journey before succumbing to exposure, frostbite, and exhaustion. He was found frozen to death by the side of the road, still clutching his wooden cross and a collection of love poetry that had been rendered illegible by snow and ice. Lady Eleanor learned of Sir Lancelot's death several weeks later and expressed mild annoyance that his romantic pursuit had continued even after his death, as his example had inspired several other knights to begin their own campaigns of courtly love directed at her. She eventually moved to a convent to escape further romantic attention. Medieval court entertainment often featured performers who specialized in increasingly dangerous acts designed to impress jaded aristocratic audiences who had seen everything conventional entertainment had to offer. These performers developed elaborate acts that combined artistry, skill, and mortal peril in ways that regularly proved fatal to both performers and spectators. Master Giovanni, an Italian entertainer working at the French court, developed what he called the most dangerous performance in Europe in 1391. His act involved juggling flaming torches while walking on a tightrope suspended over a pit filled with wild animals, creating what he believed was the perfect combination of skill, danger, and spectacle. Master Giovanni's performance was scheduled as the centerpiece of a royal feast, celebrating the marriage of a minor French noble. The act was designed to demonstrate the wealth and sophistication of the host, who had imported both the performer and the wild animals from Italy specifically for the occasion. The performance required elaborate preparation, including the construction of a special platform system, the importation of trained lions and bears, and the development of special torches that would burn brightly without dripping dangerous amounts of flaming oil onto the audience or the animals below. Master Giovanni had performed versions of his act dozens of times throughout Europe, gradually adding elements of danger and complexity to maintain his reputation as the continent's most daring entertainer. The performance for the French wedding was supposed to be his masterpiece, incorporating all of his innovations into a single spectacular display. The performance began successfully, with Master Giovanni demonstrating his juggling skills while standing safely on the ground. The flaming torches created impressive visual effects in the darkened hall, and the audience was appropriately amazed by his technical proficiency. The problems began when Master Giovanni moved to the tightrope portion of his act. The rope had been installed correctly, but the calculations for the proper tension had not accounted for the weight of Master Giovanni's protective clothing, which included hidden padding designed to protect him in case of falls. The additional weight caused the tightrope to sag more than expected, bringing Master Giovanni closer to the wild animals below and making his balancing act more difficult. The lower position also made it harder to juggle the flaming torches safely, as he had less clearance between the flames and the rope. Master Giovanni attempted to compensate for the lower rope position by juggling the torches higher, but this change in technique disrupted his practiced rhythm and caused him to lose control of one of the flaming torches. The torch fell into the pit below, startling the wild animals and causing them to become agitated and aggressive. The agitated animals began roaring and moving frantically around the pit, creating noise and motion that further disrupted Master Giovanni's concentration. He lost his balance on the tightrope and fell into the pit among the now panicked lions and bears, still holding two flaming torches. Master Giovanni's death was both rapid and spectacular, as the combination of wild animals and flaming torches created what witnesses described as a vision of hell itself. The animals, terrified by the flames and the sudden arrival of a screaming human in their enclosure, attacked Master Giovanni while simultaneously trying to escape the fire. The entire performance area became a chaos of roaring animals, spreading flames, and screaming spectators who were trying to escape what had become a life-threatening situation. Several wedding guests were injured by escaping animals, and the host's castle suffered significant fire damage before the situation could be brought under control. Perhaps the most comprehensively stupid court disaster occurred in 1396 at the palace of the Duke of Berry, who decided to celebrate his birthday with what he called the ultimate expression of aristocratic refinement. His celebration was designed to demonstrate every aspect of courtly sophistication, from fashion and cuisine to entertainment and intellectual discourse. The Duke's birthday celebration was planned as a week-long festival featuring multiple events that would showcase different aspects of noble culture. The week included fashion competitions, poetry contests, elaborate banquets, musical performances, and various other activities that were supposed to represent the pinnacle of medieval civilization. The fashion competition required participants to wear increasingly elaborate costumes that demonstrated their wealth, creativity, and commitment to aristocratic ideals. The costumes became progressively more complex and expensive each day, with participants competing to outdo each other in ostentation and artistic innovation. The poetry contest involved composed verse that was supposed to demonstrate intellectual sophistication and literary skill. Participants were required to improvise poetry on assigned topics while maintaining complex rhyme schemes and adhering to elaborate formal requirements that tested their education and creativity. The banquets featured increasingly exotic foods, prepared using the most advanced culinary techniques available, with each meal designed to surpass the previous day's offering in complexity, expense, and artistic presentation. The meals became competitive displays of gastronomic innovation that pushed medieval cooking to its absolute limits. The musical performances incorporated elaborate mechanical instruments, complex harmonies, and innovative techniques that were supposed to represent the cutting edge of medieval musical artistry. The performances became increasingly complex and technically demanding as musicians competed to demonstrate their skill and creativity. The disaster occurred on the final day of the celebration, when all of the week's competitive elements were supposed to be combined into a single spectacular finale. Participants were required to wear their most elaborate costumes while performing poetry, eating exotic foods, and participating in musical performances simultaneously. The combination of activities proved impossible to coordinate safely. Participants wearing elaborate costumes couldn't eat the complex foods without damaging their clothing. The mechanical musical instruments required so much attention that performers couldn't participate in the poetry competition. The exotic foods contained ingredients that were toxic in the quantities required for competitive eating. The finale became a cascade of disasters. As elaborate costumes caught fire from candles, participants choked on exotic foods. Mechanical instruments malfunctioned and injured their operators, and the poetry competition devolved into arguments that led to several duels. The Duke of Berry himself died during the finale when his elaborate costume, which included live birds sewn into the fabric, became entangled in a mechanical harp, the birds, terrified by the music and confined by the costume, attacked the Duke while the harp strings wrapped around his neck. He was simultaneously strangled by harp strings and pecked to death by his own decorative birds. The Duke's birthday celebration ended with 17 deaths, dozens of injuries, and the complete destruction of his palace's Great Hall. Contemporary chroniclers recorded the event as an example of the dangers of excessive refinement, noting that the pursuit of aristocratic perfection had led to aristocratic extinction. Medieval court life created perfect conditions for creative stupidity, where intelligent people with unlimited resources and excessive leisure time could devote themselves to finding elaborate ways to die. The combination of aristocratic competition, elaborate protocol, and complete disconnection from practical reality turned medieval courts into laboratories for developing new forms of fatal foolishness. Courtiers didn't just die from the normal hazards of medieval life, they died from the hazards they created for themselves in pursuit of refinement, honor, and social advancement. They transformed every aspect of civilized behavior into potential weapons, turned social interaction into a form of combat, and made survival a matter of successfully navigating obstacles that existed nowhere else in human society. The medieval court was humanity's most successful experiment in creating artificial dangers, where people who had solved the basic problems of survival could dedicate themselves to inventing new problems that were infinitely more complex and infinitely more fatal. In an age when safety meant boredom and excitement meant death, medieval courtiers chose excitement and got exactly what they bargained for. And so we reach the end of our journey through the medieval minefield of human stupidity, having witnessed 1,000 years of creative ways to die that would make Darwin himself question the survival value of intelligence. We have seen fashion kill more efficiently than war, medicine that was more dangerous than disease, construction that defied both physics and common sense, religion that turned salvation into extinction, and courtly behavior that transformed refinement into a form of elaborate suicide. The medieval period was humanity's golden age of creative mortality, when people hadn't yet learned enough about the world to realize how dangerous their ignorance could be. They approached every aspect of life with confidence that was inversely proportional to their competence, creating a perfect storm of ambition and incompetence that produced disasters with the regularity of sunrise and the inevitability of gravity. What made medieval deaths so spectacularly stupid wasn't just ignorance. Every age has its share of ignorant people. What made medieval stupidity